When I speak of God, I am not referring to some external deity sitting on a throne beyond the clouds. No, the God of whom I speak is not separate from you. The great secret, too wonderful for most to accept, is that God is your own wonderful human imagination. The I am within you is God. I am is the name of God for all eternity, and there is no other God. Tonight I stand before you to remind you that all your pain, all your sorrows, all your unfulfilled desires are seen and known by the divine presence that dwells within you. And when I say, leave it in God's hand, I am inviting you to a surrender of the most beautiful kind, not a resignation to circumstances, but a conscious transfer of your burdens to your own wonderful human imagination, which is God in action. Let me begin with the principle that forms the foundation of this understanding. Consciousness is the one and only reality. Everything you perceive, everything you experience exists because consciousness is. Your world is a manifestation of your consciousness externalized. The pain you feel, the circumstances you desire to change, the dreams yet unfulfilled, all exist within consciousness before they appear in what we call the outer world. When you cry out in pain, when you feel the weight of your burdens becoming too heavy to bear, you are not crying out to some distant deity. You are stirring the depths of your own divine consciousness. And here is the wonder of it all. God hears because God is your own consciousness. The hearing and the answering are one. I recall a lady who attended my lectures in New York some years ago. She had suffered from a debilitating condition for over 15 years. Doctors had tried everything, and nothing seemed to bring relief. One evening, after hearing me speak on this very principle, that God is your own wonderful human imagination, she went home determined to put it to the test. That night, as she lay in bed, instead of focusing on her pain, as she had done for 15 years, she began to imagine hearing her doctor say, "I can't believe it. There's no trace of your condition. You are completely healed." She felt the relief, the joy, the gratitude that would accompany such news. She didn't just visualize it, she felt the reality of it with all the emotions such a miracle would evoke. She did this for 3 consecutive nights, and then, and this is crucial, she left it in God's hands. She didn't constantly check for improvement. She didn't question when or how it would happen. She planted the seed in the fertile soil of divine imagination and allowed it to grow in its own time and in its own way. 3 weeks later, during a routine checkup, her doctor was astonished to find significant improvement. Within 2 months, the condition that had plagued her for 15 years was completely gone. The medical community called it unexplainable, but she knew the truth. God had heard her cry. The divine imagination within her had answered. Now some of you might be thinking, but Neville, I've tried to imagine better circumstances. I've tried to believe. And still my situation persists. To this, I must tell you what I have discovered through years of testing this law. The secret lies not in the mere visualization, but in the feeling, the conviction, the assumption that what you desire is already yours. Feeling is the secret. When you leave something in God's hands, you are not asking for something to be done. You are acknowledging it is done. The moment you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled and live from that state, the outside world must reshape itself to match your inner assumption. Let me clarify this principle with a simple illustration. If you were to receive wonderful news right now, news that completely resolved your most pressing problem, how would you feel? Would there not be a sensation of relief? A feeling of gratitude? Perhaps even tears of joy? That feeling state is your prayer. That feeling state is you communing with God, which is your own wonderful human imagination. Remember the words from Scripture before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. This is not the promise of some external God who might or might not respond to your pleas. This is the absolute law of your own being. The moment you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled, it is done. It is finished in the realm of divine imagination, and it must objectify itself in your world. I want to share with you another experience, this one my own. Many years ago, I found myself in a situation where financial lack seemed overwhelming. Bills were mounting, opportunities were scarce, and the future looked bleak. One night, in the quiet of my room, I decided to apply the principle I'm sharing with you tonight. Instead of focusing on the lack, instead of mentally rehearsing all the things I couldn't afford, I closed my eyes and began to imagine myself in a state of complete financial abundance. I felt the relief of having more than enough. I experienced the joy of being able to give generously. I savored the peace that comes with complete financial security. But here was the crucial step. I didn't do this with the attitude of trying to make it happen. I did it with the knowledge that in the realm of divine imagination, which is the only reality, it was already done. I was not creating a new state. I was simply occupying a state that eternally exists. I was selecting a particular pattern of consciousness to inhabit. Within a week, an unexpected opportunity presented itself that resolved my financial situation completely. It came from a direction I could never have anticipated, through means I could never have orchestrated, through my own conscious planning. The outer circumstances reshaped themselves to conform to my inner assumption. This, my dear friends, is what it means to leave it in God's hands. It means to assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled, to live from the end as though what you desire is already a present fact, and then to let the wisdom of divine imagination, which far exceeds your conscious reasoning, bring it to pass in ways you could never devise. Now, there is another aspect of leaving it in God's hands that is equally important. When you truly understand that your own wonderful human imagination is God, you realize that time is merely a concept within consciousness. What we call waiting for our desire to manifest is simply our movement through states of consciousness until we arrive at the state where our desire is experienced as reality. From God's perspective, which is your true perspective, when you are consciously exercising your divine imagination, there is no waiting. There is only the eternal now, in which all possible states exist simultaneously. When you genuinely leave something in God's hands, you are acknowledging this truth. You are surrendering the human concept of time and embracing the divine reality of the eternal now. A man once came to me in great distress. His son had been diagnosed with a condition the doctors considered untreatable. Night after night, this father had prayed to a God he imagined was separate from himself. He had begged, he had bargained, he had promised all manner of things if only his son would be healed. And yet the condition persisted. After hearing me speak, he approached me privately and asked if what I taught could help his son. I told him what I'm telling you now, that God sees his pain and hears his cry, because God is his own wonderful human imagination. I explained that instead of begging an external deity, he needed to assume the state of consciousness in which his son was already well. That night, this father did something he had never done before. Instead of praying for his son to be healed, he imagined hearing his son's doctor say, "This is remarkable. There's no medical explanation for it, but your son is completely well." He felt the immense relief and gratitude such news would bring. He embraced his imaginary son, feeling his healthy, strong body. And then he left it in God's hands. He didn't constantly check for signs of improvement. He didn't question the how or the when. He simply lived from the assumption that the healing was already complete. 3 days later, his son began to show significant improvement. Within 2 weeks, tests confirmed what this father already knew in the depth of his being. His son was completely healed. The medical staff called it spontaneous remission. But he understood the truth of what had happened. He had aligned himself with a state of consciousness in which his son was well, and the outer world had reshaped itself accordingly. This brings me to another crucial aspect of leaving it in God's hands, the concept of divine timing. When you truly surrender your desire to your divine imagination, you are also surrendering your concept of when and how it should manifest. In the realm of divine imagination, everything unfolds in its perfect sequence, in its purpose pattern. In the Bible we read, "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven." This is not some arbitrary divine scheduling, but the perfect unfoldment of states of consciousness. When you plant a seed in the ground, you don't dig it up every day to see if it's growing. You trust the intelligence inherent in the seed, the soil, the sun, and the rain to bring forth the plant in its perfect timing. So it is with the seeds you plant in the fertile soil of your divine imagination. When you truly leave something in God's hands, you are trusting the perfect timing, the perfect wisdom of your own wonderful human imagination to bring forth your desire in a way that is perfectly tailored to your highest good. I want to share with you a profound truth that has transformed countless lives, including my own. God's timing is perfect because God's timing is the natural unfoldment of states of consciousness. What appears as delay from the human perspective is often divine precision from the perspective of your imagination, which sees the entire pattern of your life. A young woman once attended my lectures in Los Angeles. She had been visualizing a particular job for months, yet it hadn't materialized. After hearing me speak on divine timing, she realized she had been trying to force her manifestation according to her schedule, rather than truly leaving it in God's hands. That night, she did something different. Instead of visualizing getting the specific job she had been focusing on, she imagined the feeling of career fulfillment. She felt the satisfaction of work that utilized her skills and brought her joy. She felt the comfort of financial security. She felt the pride of making a meaningful contribution. And then she truly surrendered the how and the when. 2 weeks later, she was offered a position she hadn't even known existed, one far better suited to her talents and desires than the job she had been visualizing. Had her original desire manifested according to her timing, she would have missed this perfect opportunity. This is the wisdom of leaving it in God's hands. Your conscious mind, magnificent as it is, can only perceive a fraction of the possibilities available to you. But your divine imagination, God within you, sees the entirety of existence. When you truly surrender to this greater wisdom, you open yourself to possibilities far exceeding what your limited consciousness could conceive. Now, I want to address something that many of you may be feeling. There are times when the pain seems too great, the burden too heavy, the night too dark. In such moments, the idea of imagining a better state can seem impossible. How can you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled when your present pain is so intense? To this, I offer you one of the most transformative truths I have ever discovered. Even in your darkest hour, you possess the divine power of imagination. Even when you cannot change your outer circumstances, you can change your inner state. And when you change your inner state, the outer must follow, for it is only a shadow, a reflection of your consciousness. I am reminded of a man who attended my lectures years ago. He had been imprisoned unjustly, facing a sentence of 20 years for a crime he did not commit. In the confines of his cell, with no apparent hope for release, he began to apply the principle I'm sharing with you tonight. Each night, as he lay on his prison cot, he would close his eyes and imagine himself walking freely under the open sky. He felt the sunshine on his face. He heard birds singing. He felt the texture of grass beneath his feet. He didn't just visualize these things, he felt them with all the intensity his imagination could muster. He did not pray for release. He assumed the state of being already free. And even though his physical body remained in that cell, his consciousness, which is the only reality, was free. He lived from that state of freedom with complete conviction. Within 3 months, evidence emerged that proved his innocence beyond any doubt. Within 6 months, he walked out of that prison a free man. The outer circumstances rearranged themselves to conform to his inner state of consciousness. This illustrates a principle I want to impress upon you tonight. The outer world has no choice but to reflect your inner assumptions. When you truly leave something in God's hands, which means to assume it is already done in your imagination, the entire universe conspires to make it so. There is a passage in Scripture that illuminates this truth. Be still and know that I am God. The stillness referenced here is not physical stillness, though that can be helpful. It is the stillness of mind that comes when you cease struggling, when you cease trying to make things happen, when you truly surrender to the wisdom and power of your own wonderful human imagination. When you are still in this way, you create a vacuum that divine wisdom rushes in to fill. Solutions appear that your conscious mind could never have devised. Paths open that were previously invisible to you. The very circumstances that seem to block your way become the stepping stones to your desire's fulfillment. I want to share with you a personal experience that demonstrates this principle of divine timing and perfect unfoldment. Many years ago, I had a deep desire to share these teachings with a wider audience. I imagined myself speaking to packed auditoriums, sharing the truth of the divine imagination with thousands of eager listeners. For a time, nothing seemed to happen. The small gatherings I was addressing remained small. The wider audience I envisioned seemed as distant as ever. But instead of becoming discouraged, I deepened my conviction. I lived more fully from the state of being a teacher to multitudes. I felt the gratitude of having already impacted countless men. I experienced the satisfaction of having already fulfilled my purpose. And then I truly left it in God's hands. I surrendered the how and the when. I released the need for my desire to manifest in a particular way or on a particular schedule. I simply lived from the state of its fulfillment. Within a year, a series of events occurred that no human planning could have orchestrated. An opportunity to speak at a major venue led to my introduction to someone who offered to publish my lectures. This led to radio appearances, which led to invitations to speak across the country. The very desire I had imagined in the silence of my room was now externalized in my physical experience. Had I insisted on my desire manifesting according to my limited conception, I might have missed the perfect pattern that divine imagination had prepared. By truly leaving it in God's hands, I allowed a manifestation far more wonderful than what my conscious mind could have devised. This brings me to another crucial aspect of leaving it in God's hands, the release of anxiety and worry. When you truly understand that your own wonderful human imagination is God, and that this God sees your pain, hears your cry, anxiety becomes unnecessary. Worry becomes redundant. Think about it this way. If you knew with absolute certainty that your desire was already fulfilled in the realm of divine imagination, which is the only reality, and that its externalization in your physical experience was simply a matter of divine timing, what would there be to worry about? What would there be to fear? The scripture tells us perfect love casts out fear. When you truly love the reality or divine imagination, when you trust it completely, fear cannot exist in your consciousness. And when fear is absent, the perfect pattern of your desire's fulfillment can manifest without distortion. A woman once approached me after a lecture, sharing that she had been consumed with anxiety about her financial future. Despite having applied the principles I teach, she found herself constantly checking her bank account, constantly calculating how long her resources would last, constantly worrying about what would happen if her desired financial abundance didn't materialize in time. I explained to her that this anxiety was actually interfering with the manifestation of her desire. By constantly focusing on lack, by constantly reinforcing the reality of not having enough, she was contradicting the very state she was trying to embody in her imagination. That night she made a decision to truly leave her financial situation in God's hands. Instead of checking her bank account multiple times a day, she disciplined herself to check it only once a week. Instead of constantly calculating how long her resources would last, she focused on the feeling of abundant resources already being hers. Instead of worrying about what would happen if her desire didn't manifest in time, she lived from the conviction that divine timing is always perfect. Within 2 weeks, an unexpected check arrived in the mail, a refund from an old investment she had written off years before. The amount was exactly what she needed to bridge the gap until a wonderful new income opportunity presented itself the following month. The anxiety that had been blocking her manifestation was dissolved by her decision to truly leave it in God's hands. And when that block was removed, the outer circumstances reshaped themselves to conform to her inner conviction. Now there is a subtlety to this principle that I want to make very clear. Leaving it in God's hands does not mean abdicating responsibility for your actions. It does not mean sitting passively, waiting for your desire to drop into your lap with no effort on your part. When you truly leave something in God's hands, which again means to surrender it to your own wonderful human imagination, you will be guided from within to take the perfect actions that facilitate the manifestation of your desire. These actions will not feel like struggle. They will feel natural, intuitive, even effortless, because they will be in perfect alignment with the state of consciousness you have assumed. A man once shared with me his desire to build a successful business. He had been struggling for years, pushing, striving, working 18-hour days, yet his business remained small and unstable. After hearing me speak on the principle of leaving it in God's hands, he realized he had been approaching his desire from a state of lack and struggle. That night he began to imagine himself already at the helm of a thriving enterprise. He felt the satisfaction of running a business that served many people while providing him with abundant income. He experienced the peace of mind that comes with stable success. And then he truly surrendered the how and the when to his divine imagination. The next morning, for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to rush to his office before dawn. Instead, he took a leisurely walk in a nearby park, something he hadn't done in as long as he could remember. During that walk, he had an insight about his business model that he had never considered before. The insight was so simple, yet so profound, that he knew instantly it would transform his enterprise. That same day, he implemented this new approach. Within 6 months, his business had tripled in size, while his working hours had been cut in half. The actions he took were not the result of anxious striving, but of inspired guidance that came naturally once he had assumed the state of his wish fulfilled. This is the true meaning of leaving it in God's hands. It is not passive waiting. It is active surrender to the wisdom of your divine imagination, which will guide you perfectly from within. I want to emphasize another aspect of leaving it in God's hands that is often misunderstood, the role of persistence. There is a seeming paradox here that confuses many. On one hand, I'm telling you to assume the state of your wish fulfilled and then release it. On the other hand, there is a need for persistence in maintaining that assumption. The resolution of this paradox lies in understanding the difference between anxious repetition and faithful consistency. When you truly leave something in God's hands, you are not repeatedly asking for it to be done. You are consistently living from the assumption that it is already done. Think of it this way. If you were to move from New York to Los Angeles, you wouldn't wake up each morning questioning whether you now live in Los Angeles. You wouldn't repeatedly affirm, I live in Los Angeles now, with the underlying doubt that perhaps you don't. you would simply live from the established fact of your new residence. So it is with the state you have assumed in your divine imagination. The persistence required is not in repeatedly visualizing your desire as though begging for it to come true. The persistence is in consistently living from the assumption that what you have imagined is already reality. A woman once shared with me her desire to restore a relationship that had been broken for many years. After hearing me speak on this principle, she began to imagine conversations with this person characterized by mutual understanding and love. She felt the joy of reconciliation. She experienced the peace of restored harmony. And then she truly left it in God's hands. She didn't repeatedly visualize these scenes out of anxiety that they might not materialize. She didn't check for signs that the reconciliation was on its way. She simply lived from the quiet conviction that in the realm of divine imagination, which is the only reality, and the reconciliation was already complete. 3 weeks passed with no apparent change in the external situation. Then one morning she received a message from the very person she had been imagining reconciling with. The message expressed exactly the sentiments she had been feeling in her imaginal scenes. Within a month, the relationship was restored in a way more beautiful than she could have consciously planned. Her persistence was not in anxious repetition, but in faithful consistency to the state she had assumed. This is the true meaning of leaving it in God's hands. Now, I want to address something that many of you may have experienced. There are times when, despite your best efforts to imagine lovingly, the outer circumstances seem to worsen before they improve. In such moments, it can be tempting to abandon your imaginal work, to conclude that it isn't working or that perhaps there are forces opposed to your good. But I want to assure you of this truth. When the outer appears to contradict your inner assumption, it is not a sign of failure. It is simply the rearrangement of circumstances necessary for the manifestation of your desire. It is the breaking down of old patterns to make way for the new. In the Bible, we read of Joseph being sold into slavery by his brothers, then being falsely accused and imprisoned in Egypt. From the outside, it appeared that his life was moving in the opposite direction of his divine destiny. Yet these very circumstances were the stepping stones that led to his eventual elevation to a position of great authority, where he saved countlessly, including those of his own family. So it is with the manifestation of your desires. What appears as setback from the limited perspective of your outer senses is often progress from the eternal perspective of your divine imagination. When you truly leave something in God's hands, you trust this process completely. You remain faithful to your assumption regardless of appearances. A man once shared with me his desire to move his family from a cramped apartment to a beautiful home with a garden for his children to play in. After hearing me speak on the principle of imagination as God, he began to imagine himself waking up each morning in the spacious bedroom of his dream home. He felt the joy of watching his children play freely in their own garden. He experienced the pride of welcoming friends and family to a home that perfectly expressed his love for beauty and comfort. And then he truly left it in God's hands. He didn't anxiously scan real estate listings. He didn't worry about how such a home could be afforded on his modest income. He simply lived from the state of already having this home. 2 weeks later, he was informed that the building where he had his apartment was being sold, and all tenants would need to relocate within 60 days. From the outside, this appeared to be a terrible setback, but he remained faithful to his assumption. 3 weeks after receiving this seemingly negative news, a distant relative whom he hadn't spoken to in years contacted him. This relative was moving overseas and needed someone trustworthy to care for his beautiful home, a home that perfectly matched what this man had been imagining. The arrangement offered was so generous that within the 60-day period, he and his family had moved into the very type of home he had been assuming was already his. What had appeared as a setback was actually the precise sequence of events necessary for the manifestation of his desire. Had he abandoned his assumption when the outer circumstances seemed to contradict it, he would have missed the perfect fulfillment that divine imagination had prepared. This brings me to one of the most crucial aspects of leaving it in God's hands: the complete acceptance of your divine nature. When you truly understand that your own wonderful human imagination is God, you realize that there is no limit to what you can create, no restriction to what you can experience, no boundary to what you can become. The only limitations you experience are those you have accepted in consciousness. The only restrictions in your life are those you have impressed upon your divine imagination. The only boundaries to your fulfillment are those you have fashioned from your beliefs about yourself and about the nature of reality. When you leave something in God's hands, which means to surrender it to your own wonderful human imagination, you are acknowledging your true identity as a divine being temporarily experiencing human form. You are reclaiming your birthright as a creator made in the image of God, which means made with the same creative power of imagination. I am reminded of a woman who had struggled with chronic illness for many years. After hearing me speak on the divine nature of human imagination, she began to question the belief system she had built around her condition. She realized that she had accepted limitation as her reality, that she had defined herself by her illness rather than by her divine nature. That night, she made a decision to reclaim her true identity. Instead of seeing herself as a woman struggling with illness, she began to imagine herself as the embodiment of vibrant health. She felt the energy coursing through her body. She experienced the joy of engaging in activities that had been impossible in her illness. She savored the freedom of a body that functioned perfectly. And then she truly left it in God's hands. She didn't constantly monitor her symptoms. She didn't anxiously look for signs of improvement. She simply lived from the quiet conviction that her true nature was divine perfection, and that this perfection was now expressing itself through a physical form. Within a month, her doctors were astonished by the improvements in her condition. Within 3 months, the very symptoms that had defined her existence for years had completely disappeared. Her physical body had reshaped itself to conform to her inner conviction of her divine nature. This is the ultimate meaning of leaving it in God's hands. It is the acknowledgement that you are not a limited human being hoping to be helped by some external power. You are a divine being temporarily experiencing human form, and the power to transform every aspect of your experience lies within your own wonderful human imagination. My dear, wonderful friends, as we draw to a close this evening, I want to impress upon you once more this transformative truth. God sees your pain and hears your cry, because God is your own wonderful human imagination. When you leave something in God's hands, you are surrendering it to the divine creative power within you, which exceeds your conscious reasoning and sees the perfect pattern of your life's unfoldment. The circumstances that now pain you, the conditions you long to change, the desires yet unfulfilled, all exist as states of consciousness. By assuming the state of your wish fulfilled, by living from the end as though what you desire is already an accomplished fact, you set in motion the divine process of manifestation that must objectify itself in your world. Do not be discouraged by appearances. Do not be swayed by the evidence of your senses. Do not abandon your assumption when the outer seems to contradict it. Remain faithful to the state you have chosen, and in divine perfect timing your outer world reshape itself to match your inner conviction. Remember always, all things whatsoever ye pray and ask for, believe that ye have received them, and ye shall have them. This is not a promise of some future fulfillment. It is the declaration of an eternal principle. The moment you truly believe you have received your desire, the moment you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled, it is yours. Leave it in God's hands by surrendering it to your own wonderful human imagination, and then watch in awe as the entire universe conspires to bring it to pass. For this is the true meaning of the divine promise. Behold, I make all things new.